Many thousands had gathered, so that they were trampling on one another. Jesus began to speak, first to his disciples, saying, "Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs. I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that can do no more. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him whom after the killing of the body has the power to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. I tell you, whoever acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will acknowledge him before the angels of God. But he who disowns me before men will be disowned before the angels of God. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. When you are brought before synagogues, rulers and authorities, do not worry about how you will defend yourselves or what you will say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you at that time what you should say."
Just to put your minds at rest, at the end I'm not going to be jumping off the stage. So, good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Did you read recently, sometime last week, about the man and the woman in the supermarket who had stopped to buy some food? I think it was America, but it could have been Canada. They paid for the food, were given the brown paper bag, which they assumed contained the food that they'd bought and left. When they arrived at the place they were going to eat it, nice view, romantic, very, very sweet, they opened the bag to discover that instead of the food that was in there, the bag contained money. The whole takings of the days from the shop. The man closed the bag, probably smiled to himself, went back to the place he bought the food from and handed it back in. What a nice man. Much to the relief of the employee who handed him the bag and the shop owner who was a little bit worried. The shop owner, so delighted that the man had brought back the money, the honesty of the man, the integrity of the man, wanted to do something to honour him, and so called the local newspaper to come and write up the story and take some pictures. The man did everything he could to stop this from happening. "I don't need the attention, it's fine," he said. But the photo was taken, the story was written, and it was written in the local newspaper and out the following week. There's the picture of the man, the woman and the shopkeeper. The caption underneath the picture, linked to the article, said, "Mr. and Mrs. Wilkinson and Ms. Morris, shop owner." Unfortunately for Mr. Wilkinson, the woman standing next to him in the photograph was not Mrs. Wilkinson. And when Mrs. Wilkinson saw this, Mrs. Wilkinson was not very happy. The newspaper also printed the story of the divorce of Mr. and Mrs. Wilkinson. Hypocrisy. Let's start with hypocrisy. Do you like Poirot? Annette really likes Poirot. She likes proper Poirot, David Suchet Poirot. I'm more of a Peter Ustinov man myself. Death on the Nile, probably the 3rd greatest film. Jaws, Mulan, Death on the Nile. One of Annette's New Year's resolutions was to watch all of the David Suchet Poirots in order. She's doing quite well. I've watched some of them while I'm stood in the TV room doing the ironing while Annette's just watching it. And there's this, that's true though, isn't it? Yeah. There's a recurring theme through the Poirots. Strychnine. Strychnine seems to be Agatha Christie's favourite poison. Yes. If a man with a funny moustache comes around your house and you have recently changed your will and someone offers you a drink of tea, don't drink it. You will die. Unquestionably, you will die. Strychnine works best, so it would seem, when it's used in a tiny measure. but that tiny measure spreads throughout the whole drink. And just to emphasize, you would die. Jesus talks about the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. He goes on to say, there is nothing contained that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner room will be proclaimed from the roofs. Are you hypocritical? Sure you are. We all are. Look at this picture. Now, I don't know. God does not make mistakes. Now, I'm not certain whether that's hypocrisy or whether that's irony. The next one might be irony. Get a brain, morons. Morons is spelled wrong. I have this poster. I might have mentioned this before. I have this poster in my classroom at school. Scientists say the universe is made up of protons, neutrons and electrons. They forgot to mention morons. It took me 6 months to realise neutrons is spelt wrong. What an idiot I am! How about this for hypocrisy then? Have you ever not loved your neighbour as you love yourself? Or what about, have you put something ahead of God? Jesus' real complaint is against the Pharisees, as they are purposely hypocritical. They know that what they say is phony. They don't act out. That is the hypocrisy Jesus is condemning. Not mistakes and typos and being a little bit foolish. But when people say they know God and they know what they're supposed to do, but don't act the way they should. Well, there's more to the text than simply that. Let me tell you a story. The bits of papers in the envelope. Have a look at the name that's in the envelope. When I read the name, I would like you to stand up, stay stood up, and hold the paper. Hold the paper. Stand up, stay stood up, and hold the paper. As I said, my apologies if it turns out that there's been some kind of gender issue going on there. I'm going to read a story from a book called When Christ Comes by Max Lucado, slightly altered by me, edited further by Annette, and it's about imagining something. There is a book in the Bible called 1 Thessalonians. It's really a letter from a man called Paul to a church in a place called Thessalonica, hence Thessalonians. And Paul writes about when he will meet them all again, the Thessalonians. And because they are Christians, that they will probably be in heaven. He says, it is you no less than others, who are our hope, our joy, and our reason for boasting of our victory in the presence of our Lord Jesus when he comes. So I want you to try and imagine the same. Think about the day that Jesus comes. There you are in a big circle of Christians. Then imagine that Jesus asks you a question. I'm speculating now, but I wonder if Christ might say these words to you. I'm so proud that you let me use you. Because of you, others are here in heaven today. Would you like to meet them? Chances are you'd be surprised to hear these words. It would be one thing for Paul to hear them. He wrote books that are in the Bible, for goodness sake. Or Tony or Sally, they're pastors of churches. Or a foreign missionary or famous evangelist, like on the God channel on Sky. But us, little old me. At this point, Jesus might, again, these are wild speculations, but Jesus might turn to the crowd and invite them. With his hand on your shoulder, he announces, do we have any here who are influenced by this child of mine? One by one, they begin to step out and walk towards you. The first is a neighbour, Tom, a man who lived next door. To be frank, you didn't expect him. You never knew I was watching, he explains, but I was. I told Gwen, and because of you, she and I are here. And then comes a cluster of people, half a dozen or so. One speaks for the others. You helped out with the youth nights when we were kids. You didn't open your mouth much, but you were always there. Simon, James, and Harry became Christians one evening after you had unlocked the church. The line continues. Judith, a co-worker, noticed how you always controlled your temper. A receptionist, Sarah, remarked how you greeted her each morning with a smile. Someone you don't even remember reminds you of the time you saw her in the hospital. You came to visit a friend in the next bed, but on the way out you stopped and spoke a word of hope with this stranger who looked lonely. She tells you her name is Jenny. You are most amazed by the people from other countries. After all, you never even travelled to Asia or Africa or Latin America. But look, Cambodians, Nigerians, Colombians, how did you influence them? Jesus reminds you of the missionaries who came your way. Your friends said you had a soft spot for them. You always gave money, sometimes just a few pennies, but you always prayed. Now you understand, you don't have a soft spot. You had the Holy Spirit. And because you and they were obedient to the Spirit, Yutan from Cambodia is here. So is Kinsley from Nigeria. And Maria from Colombia. It's not long before you and Jesus are surrounded by a delightful collection of people who you had touched. Some you know, some you don't. But Jesus isn't finished. He loves to save the best for last. And I can't help imagining him doing the same in heaven. You've seen the neighbours, the co-workers, the people you hardly knew. But there is one more group. And Jesus parts the crowd so you'll see them. Your family. Your spouse is the first to embrace you. There were times when you wondered if either of you would make it. But there is a net with you in heaven. Next come your children. Nick, Hannah, Philip and Stephen. Children for whom you cared and over whom you prayed. Then your parents, Anne and Clyde. Clyde, no longer frail like you last saw us, but renewed. And then some faces you don't recognise. You have to be told. Michael, Kate, Ethan and Joel. These are grandchildren and great-grandchildren and descendants you never saw until today. Will such a moment occur? I don't know. If it does, you can be certain of two things. First, its grandeur and glory will far outstrip any description my words can carry. No one has ever imagined what God has prepared for those who love Him. 1 Corinthians. And that no one certainly includes this one. Second, if such a moment of reunion occurs, you can be certain you won't regret any sacrifices you made for Jesus' kingdom. The hours of service for Christ. You won't regret them. The money you gave, you'd give 1,000 times over. The times you helped the poor and loved the lost, you'd do it again. You won't feel the regret. Heaven knows no regret. Our God is too kind to let us face the opportunities we missed, but He is happy to let us see the ones we see. Look at the people. Think of all the lives you've touched and all the lives of people who loved you. Thank you. People are watching. So don't let them see hypocrisy. Let them see honesty and truth and integrity. I've lied to Annette a couple of times. Nothing particularly big as far as I'm aware. Or willing to admit from up here. What Annette does is two things. She either tells me straight away that she knows that I've lied to her, or lets me think I've got away with it for a period of time. Sometimes quite a lot of time. And then, bam, out of nowhere, she gets me. Do you remember when? She knows, doesn't she, Stephen? She knows everything. Nothing is hidden. Jesus says the same. And He's talking about God, not just Annette. Jesus goes on to say that we should not be afraid of men, for what can they do but kill us? That is extreme. In the Bible study notes, I used the word evil. I struggled for some time over whether to use the word or not. I spent longer on that word than any of the others. And at the end I copped out and put it in quotes. Did you read about this place on Friday? This is Inspiration Point in Rancho Palos Verdes. A man called Cameron Brown has been found guilty of first-degree murder in a Los Angeles court for throwing his 4-year-old daughter off the cliff. The prosecution alleged that it was because he wanted revenge against his daughter's mother, his ex-wife, and the death of his child would mean that he avoids custody payments. Isn't that evil? But that actually wasn't the evil that I was thinking about when I put evil in the Bible study notes. I was actually thinking about Nepal. Did you see this broadcast from Sky?
After the horror and loss of the earthquake, the makeshift camps that have sprung up across Nepal are supposed to bring a sense of sanctuary, particularly for the young. But an Indian charity says the camps are being targeted by people traffickers from across the border, preying on the destitute and luring them into the sex trade.
Because people have nothing, and their houses have collapsed, they have nothing to eat, there is no sanitation, no medicine, nothing. So in this situation it is very serious, because young adolescent girls are being lured. They are being promised jobs, and we fear that they might be trafficked for sexual exploitation and also for forced labor.
The charity says the welcoming nature of the Nepalese and the proliferation of aid organisations on the ground in the region act as cover for the unscrupulous sex traffickers, particularly with local police focused on the rescue and recovery efforts.
When we asked around and we asked police for assistance, there wasn't any. So this is a very...
How can anyone see the devastation and destruction and death that has happened in Nepal following the earthquake? How can people see these people with no homes, desperate for food and water and safety, and view it as an opportunity? How can someone watch what's happened in Nepal and think that's a way of getting more children and women trafficked for sex? I think that classifies as evil. And yet, though all of my personal human instincts cannot imagine anything worse, Christ talks about the fact that though there is this, there is death. There is death at the end of it. But, he says, death is not the end. I'm not dismissing, nor would I ever, the unimaginable things that people have gone through, and people here will have gone through. But Christ talks about the fact that there is more than this. It comes with a warning. The warning is about who people should really fear, and where the real power is. The power for eternity. The one who has power over where you spend forever. And forever is a very, very long time. I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that can do no more. Fear him who, after the body has been killed, has authority to throw you into hell. We don't always think about Jesus in this way. I certainly don't usually preach about Jesus in this way. I preach that Jesus is love. But this is terrifying. Hell is terrifying. However, we need to sometimes hear that message. That Jesus is love, but it's love at a cost. The cost was Jesus himself. For those who do not receive or understand Jesus, there is a cost, and that is terrifying. But, and bear with me here, Jesus goes on to say, don't be afraid. You are worth more, infinitely more, as it happens. So much so that Jesus was willing to die for you, so that you avoid hell. Know me, is what Jesus says. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But whoever does will not be disowned. Don't be afraid is the message. God cares about you. He has numbered the hairs on your head. Quite a lot for some. Morning, Rick. Morning. Not so much for others. Do not be afraid when people question you about your faith, because you will be given the words to say. Do not be afraid. The NIV calls this section warnings and encouragements. It doesn't get any more obvious than this. Here's the warning. Be afraid of God, because He's more powerful than death itself. Here's the encouragement. He loves you more than anything else or anyone else in the whole world, forever and ever and ever. Here's the warning. Live a life of integrity and truth. Don't be hypocritical. Be true to yourself and to God, because everything that one day was hidden will one day be known. Here's the encouragement. Don't worry. Don't be afraid, as the image says. God will take care of you. Trust Him. He will give you the words to speak when you speak of Him and His Son. Let me share with you some bad news. One day you are going to die. This was a tweet yesterday. Tweet, is that the right word? This is a tweet from James May, as in the Top Gear. True enough, I suppose, but a bit defeatist, with the following image. All routes lead to the cemetery. Next video, please.
Bass player. The Duke of Smooth. The Dr. Shot. Man with no tan. Please say hello to Death himself. The Grim Reaper. You might be a king or a little street sweeper, but sooner or later you dance with the Reaper.
One day we will face the Grim Reaper. Let me share some good news with you. That's not the end though. In Phoenix, Arizona, a 26-year-old mother stared down at her 7-year-old son who was dying of terminal leukemia. Like any parent, she wanted her son to grow up and fulfill all his dreams. But she now knew that was no longer possible. The leukemia would see to that. She took her son's hand and asked, "Frankie, did you ever think about what you wanted to be once you grew up?" "Mommy," he said, "I always wanted to be a fireman when I grew up." Later that day, she went to a local fire department in Phoenix, where she met the chief fireman. She explained her son's final wish and asked if it might be possible to give her 7-year-old son a ride around the block on a fire engine. The fireman said, "We can do better than that. If you'll have your son ready at 7 o'clock Wednesday morning, we'll make him an honorary fireman for the whole day. He can come down to the fire station, eat with us, go out on all the fire calls, the whole 9 yards. And if you'll give us his sizes, we'll get him a real fireman's uniform for him, with a real fire hat." 3 days later, the fireman picked up Frank, dressed him in his fire uniform, and escorted him from his hospital bed to the waiting fire truck. Frank got to sit on the back of the truck and help steer it down the fire station. He got to ring their bells and pull on the sirens. It was perfect. There were 3 fire calls in Phoenix that day, and Frank got to go out on all 3 of them. He rode in the different fire engines, the paramedics' van, and even the fire chief's car. Having his dream come true, with all the love and attention that was lavished on him, so deeply touched Frank that the doctor said that was what made them think he lived 3 months longer than they said. However, the inevitable was going to happen. One night, all of his vital signs began to drop dramatically, and the head nurse began to call the family members to the hospital. She remembered the day Frank had spent as a fireman, so she called the fire chief and asked if it would be possible to send a fireman in uniform to the hospital to be with Frank. The chief replied, "Thank you for letting us know. We can do better than that. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Will you please do me a favour? When you hear the sirens screaming and see the lights flashing, will you announce over the PA system that there's not a real fire? It's just the fire department coming to see one of its finest members one more time. And will you open the window to his room?" About 5 minutes later, a fire truck arrived, sirens blazing. They extended the ladder up to Frank's 3rd floor open window. 16 firefighters climbed up the ladder into Frank's room. With his mother's permission, they hugged him and held him and told him how much they loved him. With his dying breath, Frank looked up at the fire chief and said, "Chief, am I really a fireman now?" "Frankie, you are. You are then the head chief. The head chief, Frankie, Jesus. He's holding your hand." With these words, Frank smiled and said, "I know. He's been holding my hand all day." And with that, he closed his eyes one last time. Have you heard of the Make-A-Wish Foundation? Make-A-Wish Foundation gives children all over the world the dream of their wishes. Whether that is meeting Spider-Man, or Batman, or Princess Jasmine, or even the President of America. The Make-A-Wish Foundation does what it can to give children their final wish. It allows children who dreamed of being a policeman, the opportunity to be a policeman. Those who wanted to be American football stars, American football stars. Those who wanted to be wrestlers. Those who wanted to be pilots. And like Frank, it allows them to be firemen. Frank Salazar is described by the Make-A-Wish Foundation website as the first official Make-A-Wish kid. It's important to remember, with all the evil in the world that is out there, there is so much good. We are created by God in His image, and His image is an image of love. So is it any surprise that there is so much good out there? Let's not forget that this week. But even better, death is not the end. Is there life after death? Trespass here. Find out. We mourn and we grieve for those who have gone. I think about my dad every day. When someone tells me a joke, he's the first person that I think I'll be able to tell. And I imagine him telling me jokes back. We miss those who've gone. But death is not the end. There is something greater. Let us make this life as good as we can for those around us. But let's remember, more than anything else, what is there to be afraid of? Jesus says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid even of death. Because God is waiting for you. God is there. He will judge the living and the dead. And those who love Him and love His Son will spend forever in paradise. And as I think I said earlier, forever and ever is a very long time. Thank you.